All right, Don Nicastro here, managing editor at CMSWire at Forrester North America, Forrester CX. We're in Nashville, Tennessee today. We're here with Forrester analysts Sue Doyle and Judy Weader. First of all, good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here with us at CMSWire. We're going to get right to it. You talk a lot about focusing on organizational outcomes, how CX leaders should do that. My question is, wait, shouldn't we all be doing that? Right? So what are kind of the blockers on why they might not be doing that? Why CX leaders might not be? What gets in the way of focusing on organizational outcomes?
Some of it is we get so stuck on customer experience that we think that the customer is the only thing that we can possibly care about. And so you have the customer experience leader who's talking about, I'm going to improve this beacon metric, or I'm going to make the number of complaints go down, or I'm going to do this and that relative to the customer, but they're not talking the language of their executives because this is the world that they live in. And the problem is executives live in a slightly different world where they're thinking about revenue, they're thinking about cost, they're thinking about future-proofing the business. And so it's almost a translation problem because everybody's speaking a different language. And so it's actually on the customer experience leader to figure out how to bridge that gap and to speak the language of their executives.
Yeah, it's almost like you go out to them, Judy, and say, "Do you speak CX, CFO, or don't
Right.
you?" And it's incumbent upon the CX leaders to do that, right? To kind of make those standard terms in the organization that everyone understands and can kind of speak to. So ultimately, what do these successful, CXOs, these chief customer experience officers, whatever you want to call them, what do they do differently? Those leaders that are being successful.
Yeah, but they don't make assumptions, right? They don't assume that everyone cares about customers, right? You'd be hard pressed to find a CEO who says they don't care about customers, right? But it's the nuance that's important. And Judy, you and I talk about the fact that, CX leaders are a little bit late to the party, not by design, but because other roles in the organization are far more established. People know what sales does, they know what operations does, they know what finance does, and most times marketing. But CX is something that still feels a little bit intangible to them.
Yeah. It's like, what is that again? Like, what do we do here? As a reporter, for CMSWire, now an editor, we've been trying to figure that out ourselves. Who are the leaders? Who owns customer experience? Some people just say, oh, that's marketing. Marketing owns customer experience. Well, not quite. It doesn't always work that way. So you discussed going from, support person to salesperson. I thought that was a super fascinating comment. I would love to hear more about that.
So in this case, if we're talking about what a customer experience person manages, they often think about all those things that are related to customer support, which could also equate to customer service. But the fact is they also have to think about how they're selling their organization to their customers. And they also have to think about how they're selling customer experience within their organization. So, sort of back to the whole notion of changing the language. And this is really what Sue and I are talking about at this forum, is how do you connect the things that you're doing to improve your customer's experience to the things that the business is trying to do. So you're improving the product, you're improving the service, but you're also, by doing that, improving the revenue position of your firm, you're improving the cost, or lowering the amount of cost that you're spending, you're adding your resilience, the future proofing by reducing risk, reducing attrition. So it's a matter of kind of shifting your focus. It doesn't mean that you stop doing all those things that are supportive, but it means that you start thinking about how you're selling CX to your executives so that you can provide all those great services and things that you want to be able to provide to your customers.
Also, your team discussed a lot, CX leaders needing to focus on stakeholder outcomes, moving from stakeholder outcomes to shareholder outcomes. In practice, what does that look like?
Well, executives are driven by quarterly numbers, right? And that's how they get their funding. That's how the business runs. And so it's very hard to keep that out of their sight. So they know the customers are important, obviously, but how does that relate? And when Judy and I did research on the top 100 companies in the world, the largest global firms, we found out that many of them talk about customers as customers are great and they generate revenue for the business, which is not customer obsession. It's not customer experience. Customers were seen as a means to an end. But the majority of firms say in some way, we care about our customers, but they don't necessarily back it up with, and here's how we do it, right? And here's how we commit to shareholders in terms of what we're going to do to improve that experience for customers. Not just out of altruism, but because it is differentiation for most organizations.
And then we're seeing them putting that together. So when we look at shareholder presentations, you see that the customer experience metrics are being placed side by side with things like EPS. So when you see that starting to happen, they're creating a story and they're explaining the connection between providing a better customer experience to increasing the revenue or reducing the cost or whatever it is that the firm is trying to accomplish, and then saying, here's the outcome for you, shareholder. So it's a matter of creating that through line. And this is, like I said, this is part of that language that customer experience leaders have to think about. So if they're not talking to their finance people, if they're not talking to their corporate strategy people, that's a big miss. It's great to have all those people who want to help you within the C-suite who say, yes, customers are important. But if you can't connect the dots financially, then your shareholders may lose interest over the course of time and say, okay, but so what is this doing for me as a partial owner of this organization?
Right.
But look at our NPS, it went up. Look at our customer effort score, that went up. Give us more money. Look at us, we're doing great. Do you think a lot of CX leaders fail in that regard? They just kind of sell based on those vanity metrics.
And that's not vanity. I mean, these are real customer
Yeah.
experience metrics, but it's very hard for an executive to tie NPS to revenue, cost, or resilience if someone hasn't already done it for them. I mean, one of the things that Judy and I have seen a lot is we take a lot of inquiry where someone says, okay, great, I used an ROI model, I've been able to prove the ROI of CX. Why do I have to keep going back to the well to keep proving it again and again? It's because that connection was never made to revenue, cost, and resilience.
Right. And NPS, CSAT, OSAT, any of those beacon metrics, they can be really, really helpful for providing at least one sense of the perception that customers have of their experience. But if you can't do the analysis to connect that to the things that matter, like whether a customer is going to stay with you or whether they're going to churn, whether they're going to buy more from you, whether they're going to advocate for you, then it's just a number. And the numbers that speak the loudest, especially to executives who are gold on this and to shareholders who are making their purchase decisions based on it, it's revenue, it's cost. So you have to focus on the things that matter to the organization. It doesn't mean that you sacrifice your customer's experience. It means that you think about how those things are connected and then you tell that story.
It goes back to the original message, focus on organizational outcomes.
Yep.